Hello. So this is I will explain this model here. And I just want to briefly discuss the method that's used here. So this is systems diagramming. And systems diagramming, it's you take two changing. You have one variable here. So for instance, you could say fiscal spending. No, not like stock market prices, like index. If you look at the index, how does the stock market price affect things? So let's say, how does when stock market prices go down, right? Then this decreases personal saving, and when personal savings go down, then this reduces stock market prices because people have to sell off stock market, or they have to sell their stocks to keep their like budgets floating. But as people sell stocks on the stock market, then the personal savings will get reduced because as people sell stocks, then the value of the stocks lower. And so this is what systems thinking does, is that it takes these kind of broad category variables like this, stock market prices, and then how it affects personal savings. And then often it does so in self-reinforcing loops, which allows you to see how kind of very big changes happens to things in quite large systems. And then you can just add kind of interest rates on this, interest rates, and then we can add electricity prices, and then we can add supply chain shocks, supply chains, and that affects insurance, right? Insurance. And so then you know that stock market prices will, interest rates does increase cost of financing, electricity prices increases cost of production, and so stock markets will, the supply chains are affected by war and insurance, and this affects stock market prices, and it affects the personal savings. So now you know that, well, stock market will tank, most likely will tank, like it has tanked and it will continue tanking, like it will continue going down once people start realizing these things on a larger level. That's just a method, and we can know that it's just like, we know that when you drop a rock, right, drop rock, then it falls with a 99% certainty. Rock falls. Of course, it might be sometime this might not happen, but to a large extent, if you increase electricity prices, stock market prices will go down a little bit. And so by taking these kind of large, like you couldn't map these things, like you don't see this unless you do it in a systems thinking way. But once you have this systems lens, then you can really see, all right, okay. So we know that if you increase anxiety and uncertainty, you will have an increased desire for certainty. Like, we know that. And to get this certainty, like, you will apply either a legal method to get there or a criminal method to get there. Like, it must be so. And so you have these change which are like 80% or 90% correct. Of course, they're not perfectly correct, but to a large extent they're correct. And it doesn't need to be 100% correct, right? It's not made to be precise here, but it's you get the large picture of how things are changing. So let me just kind of briefly state what this just gives a big overview of current kind of economic markets, and in the context of what I would say is autonomy and self-regulation and addiction treatment. And let's just start here, right, by saying that, well, we have climate change and we have conflict that's increasing through wars. Once you have a conflict always leads to more conflict. You have an escalation. I fight, you fight me back. And then as you fight me back, I will fight back more. And suddenly this, or sooner or later, this leads to war. It always leads to war. And when we have war, we have an increased cost of electricity, and we're seeing this with the gas things. This leads also to supply chain disruptions, because you don't know if you can get the ships from Taiwan or not. And then we have insurance costs. And so when you have insurance costs, this increases the supply chain disruptions. And so when we have supply chain disruptions, there's increased insurance costs. And so these two things, they force, or they feed on themselves, and so they are self-reinforcing. And the same thing here with the cost of electricity. Cost of electricity increases supply chain disruptions, and the supply chain disruptions increases the cost of the electricity to a large extent. Not perfect, but to a large extent, that's what's happening. And here are just kind of three policy tools. We have labor policy, fiscal policy, and interest rates. So if you're a policymaker, you can look at these things to change. Interest rates, those have gone up a lot. Fiscal policy, we're not going to see a lot of fiscal spending like we had COVID or 2020. We had a very large increase in this. Most likely we will start to see this getting looser. And these are cost drivers. We have climate change at the same time. That's increasing all of these. It's increasing war, and it's increasing not insurance costs, because it doesn't happen that fast, but supply chain disruptions definitely, and then cost of electricity. So we have cost drivers. Suddenly we have increased costs of things, and there's a lot of macroeconomic shocks here. For instance, with the climate change that's happening, we have increased warming down south. This leads to food shortages, and there's an increased amount of migration. I'll just put the war here as well, because the war in itself increases the food shortages. It's the supply chain disruptions actually which increases that. Oh, sorry, I'll just do it like that. It's the cost drivers. Cost drivers increase food shortages. And this leads to, like all of these things leads to increased cost of different things. Mostly it affects legal methods of work. Legal methods are much more impacted by these things, because they are in the kind of traditional system, if you say so. But our desire for certainty will lead some of us to apply criminal methods to find certainty. For instance, people who come as economic migrants, who feels anxiety and uncertainty, they will not be able to apply for legal work because they are a migrant, paperless migrant. And so they will do things which are outside of the current legal system, criminal methods. And I've spoken with people and I've heard them say the same thing. Like, the system does not work because the social contract which keeps us together, as there's an increased cost on this legal system, it's an increased cost here. The social contract breaks apart, and normally the social contract, like when we have a social contract, this increases the costs of criminal methods. But when the social contract breaks because the social system does not work, then the cost of criminal methods get reduced. And this increases the benefits of criminality, and it leads to autonomy, like our ability to take care of ourselves, regulation through self-control. Yeah, exactly. So you get the food, you get the things, like you get all of those things. With the legal system, there's a cost to that, right? You have to work a bit. It's the same with the criminal method. It's a cost always. Here you have taxes. Taxes, there's a delay to the taxes. There's a delay to the value or the benefit of the taxes. We get healthcare and we get education. But there's a delay here. It takes quite some time. And then we get personal benefits, and with that we can take care of ourselves. Taxes also leads to regulation through public control, essentially. We can regulate our mood and our attention or our mental health through public services. So we have social services and we have increased law enforcement. This increased law enforcement and social services might in some cases lead to some kind of certainty, but often it leads to a sense of control. And control leads to conflict, we know that. Like when you try to control someone, it leads to conflict. And well, so it does so, it tries to impose more certainty through the increased cost of criminality. And surely it does work in that sense by acting on increasing the cost of criminality. But at the same time, it's increasing conflict and control. And conflict leads to uncertainty, and more uncertainty will lead to more law enforcement. As we increase conflict, you get a reduced support network. Some get a reduced support network because you have a conflict between the two parties that are, or the support. The support network. That's what gives us our role models and ability to learn. It's essentially the social security net, if you say so. And this gives us our personal vision. Our personal vision gives us a bit of anxiety and uncertainty. Will I achieve that? Will I get to this thing? Will I become the person that I wanted to become? Will I be able to maintain my health? Will I be able to be a good person? Will I be able to do this? Will I be able to do that? And this leads to a desire for certainty about that, and it leads to two different methods, essentially, two different paths that we go through. Yes, to reach autonomy, or to reach essentially our personal vision. And we will do that through two different ways. And to achieve autonomy, a capacity to self-regulate, which gives us cognitive flexibility, it gives us increased conceptual learning, creativity, mental and physical health, self-esteem, increases our ability to trust people, and it also increases the persistence of behavior change. So autonomy or self-regulation is really good. But if you increase control, then you will decrease autonomy. And we increase conflict and we increase uncertainty. And so then you have a reduction of autonomy, essentially. So you have an increased reliance on regulation through public control, essentially, which decreases the essential support network which is needed to develop a healthy sense of self. So what we will essentially see, and I'm quite certain about this, unless policymakers really reduce this through reducing this, I would say, if we can reduce these two things, can we reduce these two things as a society? If we can reduce these two things, then we will see increased sense of autonomy. You can increase the cost of criminality, but if you just, I believe, if you just increase the benefits of legal and reduce the cost here, to make essentially energy or things flow through this instead of this, because this is a far faster method to reach autonomy. Currently, there's much less constraints here. As you're increasing this suddenly, and it does happen suddenly, this system is not built for that. We have a huge strain here on the costs and taxes side, which really makes like this becomes a bottleneck, and you'll just kind of see a path going through here, and sadly that will increase the amount of conflict, and it will reduce the support network and will lead to a divide in societies. So this is quite this will happen, this will play out in this kind of way. I'm quite certain about that, and unless we change, and it's this which needs to change, like this part, this needs to flow, we need to increase, or like we need to increase the flows here, essentially increase the flows there, and then we need to reduce that, because by doing that, then you will be able to get a better flow here, and you won't have like control. It's sort of destruction of the social contracts, and make the benefits here like convert them into, it's like we not just need to kind of reduce the flow here, and you do that only through, you can't do it through increasing the control, because then you'll just create an alternative society. Yeah, that's it. It's quite long.